I have guided hunts on 41 worlds. I have put clients within a clean shot of the horned drowners of Semmel Deep, the pack cats of the ash steppe, the great slow browsers that the registry lists as the largest walking things in the arm of the galaxy we are permitted to sell. I carry the second crest of my caste. I have never, in 600 and some standard years of a vascular life, lost a client I meant to keep. I am telling you that first so that you understand I was not a fool, and that when the fear came for me on the preserve world, it did not come because I was careless. It came because I was good, and being good was exactly the wrong thing to be there. The booking came through the High Consortium, which is how I knew the money was serious before I read a single line. The consortium does not carry small hunts. They carry the ones with names, the ones a client wants stuffed and lit in a hall so that other clients will come to the hall and ask, and be told, and go away wanting. 9 clients, all of them crestborn, all of them the sort who had killed everything a vascular of means is expected to kill and had run out of things that frighten them. I have met that kind many times. There is a particular flatness that comes into the eyes of a hunter who has stopped being afraid of anything. They come looking to buy the fear back. Usually I can sell it to them at a controlled dose and bring them home whole. The quarry on the manifest was a human. I want to be careful here, because I have told this account to the registry board and to 2 survivors' councils, and to a room full of young wardens who wanted the shape of a story more than they wanted the truth. And every time I say the word human, somebody in the room leans forward with a hungry expression, as if the word alone were the whole of it. It is not the word. In those days the word did not carry what it carries now. In those days a human was a license prize. A red register animal, yes, the registry files mark the species with the deep mark, the mark they put on the drowners and the steppe cats and the browsers, the mark that means restricted, means expensive, means a warden and a permit and a consortium seal. But restricted is not the same as impossible. We hunt restricted things for a living. That is the whole of the trade. The deep mark on the file did not frighten me. It priced the hunt. And the file itself did not frighten me. I read it on the crossing in the long quiet of transit, with the 9 clients in their cabins dreaming whatever crestborn dream of a haul with a new trophy in it. The file was thin. That should have been the first thing. Restricted quarry usually carries a fat file: behaviors, ranges, kill accounts, the names of the wardens who died writing the entries. This one had a single subject and almost nothing behind it. One human. Old. Living alone on the preserve. Under the standing arrangement, the registry keeps with a handful of what they call resident specimens, old individuals of restricted species, permitted to live out their span on a warden world in exchange for the right to license a hunt against them once, at the end. It is a clean arrangement. It is legal. I had run 4 hunts under it, against other species, and brought every client home. The human's entry gave a name which surprised me, because animals do not usually carry names in the registry. The name was Halloran. There was a designation beside it that I did not fully read the weight of at the time, a service mark from the human homeworld, a rank in some organization of theirs, retired. I read it the way you read the provenance line on any old trophy. This one used to do something. Now it lives on the preserve. Now it is ours to close. We came down over the preserve in the morning, and the world was beautiful, and I will hold on to that, because I want you to know it was beautiful before it was anything else. Red fern to the horizon, tall as a vascular stands, moving in a wind that smelled of iron and green water. Open savanna where the fern thinned, gold in the long light. A marsh belt to the north, silver and black, threaded with old channels. The suns, it is a 2-sun world, sat low and stayed low a long time, so that everything wore a bright level daylight for most of the working hours, the kind of light a hunter loves, the kind that hides nothing. I remember thinking that. I remember thinking, standing on the ramp with the fern wind pulling at my crest, that it was a generous world to hunt on, nothing to hide in, everything lit. I did not yet understand that a place where nothing can hide is not an advantage to the one who does not need to hide. The clients were eager the way crestborn are eager, which is to say quietly, with a great deal of expensive equipment and very little patience for being told things. I gave them the standing brief anyway. I always give the brief. It is the difference between a warden and a man who takes money to walk in front of a gun. I told them the human was old, but that old restricted quarry is the most dangerous kind, because it has survived long enough to learn the ground. I told them we would work in a tight formation, that no one would break off alone, that the shot would be called by me and taken on my word and not before. I told them the preserve was large and that we would not rush, that we would let the ground tell us where the quarry moved and go to meet it rather than chase it, because you do not chase restricted quarry, you position against it. Standard warden doctrine. Sound doctrine. I have staked my life on it 41 times and kept it. They listened the way you listen to a thing you have already decided is beneath you. I have seen that too. I did not press it. You cannot make a crestborn afraid on the ramp. The ground has to do it, and the ground usually does, and by the second day they are listening properly. I counted on the ground to teach them. The ground taught them. It did not teach them what I meant it to. We picked up the human sign on the first afternoon at the edge of the fern where it gave onto the savannah. Sign is the trade, the marks a thing leaves, the language of its passage, and I am fluent in it the way a vascular warden of my crest is expected to be. The sign was clean and unhurried. A track through the fern, a place where he had knelt by a channel, the char of a small controlled fire long cold, a line of passage angling northeast toward the marsh belt. Old sign. 2 days, maybe 3. Exactly the sort of sign a resident specimen leaves, going about the slow business of staying alive on a world that feeds it. I read it and felt the settling I always feel when the hunt takes its proper shape. Here is the quarry. Here is the ground. Here is the work. I read it correctly. Every mark I read correctly. That is the part I have never been able to make the councils understand. I did not misread a single sign. The trail led northeast, and the human had left it northeast, and I followed it northeast, and it was all exactly true. What I did not understand, what no warden in the registry understood in those days, is that the truth of a track is not the same as the intention behind it. I had spent 600 years learning to read what an animal had done in order to know what it would do. It had never once occurred to me to hunt a thing that read what I would do in order to decide what it had done. We made camp that first night on a rise in the fern, with good sightlines and the sun still bright at the horizon, and I set a watch and nothing came. In the morning the sign led on, northeast, patient, and we followed it, and by the middle of the day we had closed the 2 days between us to less than 1. That is normal. The party moves faster than the quarry because the party is hunting and the quarry is only living. We were gaining. The clients felt it, and their quiet eagerness sharpened into something with an edge on it. I felt it too. I will not pretend I stood above it. The oldest thing in me, the thing under the crest and the cast and the 600 years, felt the gap closing and was glad. It was on the second evening that I found the first wrong thing, and I did not know it was wrong, and that is the part I have to live in. The trail crossed a channel at a shallow place, a natural ford, the obvious crossing, and on the far bank the human sign came up out of the water and went on. Ordinary. Except that when I knelt at the ford to read the crossing only habit, I saw that the sign on the near bank was 2 days old and the sign on the far bank was 2 days old, and the water between them had been crossed twice. Once going, once coming back. He had crossed, and then at some point he had crossed again in the other direction, and then I found it, reading wider, reading the way you read only when the ground has already begun to frighten you, and you do not yet know why. He had crossed a third time, going on. He had come back to look at his own trail. He had stood on the far bank where we now stood and looked back the way he had come, the way we had come, and then gone on. Animals do not do that. I want to be exact. Animals backtrack. A browser will double on its own line to foul a scent. A stepcat will loop to come at a follower from behind. That is not what this was. This was a thing that had walked its own back trail to see what its trail looked like to something coming up behind it. This was a thing checking its work. I knelt at the ford and I felt the first cold finger of it touch the base of my crest, and I told myself I was reading too much into a muddy bank, and I stood up, and I did not tell the clients, because there was nothing to tell them that would not sound like a warden losing his edge, and I led them on. I have thought since about that decision more than any other decision in 600 years. It was the correct decision by every rule of the trade. It was also the moment the hunt stopped being mine, if it had ever been mine, and I did not know it. And I led 9 crestborn hunters northeast into the marsh belt on the trail of a thing that had already turned around once to look at us. The marsh took 2 of them on the 3rd day, and it took them so gently that I nearly did not understand it had happened. The marsh belt is a country of channels and false ground, silver water over black mud, reed that stands like a wall, islands of firm footing that are not always where the sign says they should be. Restricted quarry runs to that kind of country. It always has. Broken ground is the friend of the hunted, and I had read the humans turn to the marsh as the ordinary flight of an old thing seeking the ground that favors it. That reading was correct too. Everything I read was correct. He had gone into the marsh because the marsh favored him. I simply understood the word favor to mean the same thing it had always meant, and it did not mean that anymore. We went in tight, in single file on the firm ground, with the human sign clear ahead of us running the causeways between the deep channels. The suns were bright and low, and the water threw the light up into our eyes off the flats, which is a nuisance and no more, I told myself, only a nuisance, the ordinary difficulty of hunting toward a low sun over water. It was not a nuisance. It was a wall of light, standing between us and everything ahead of us on the causeway, and the human had chosen a line that kept it there all through the bright hours, and I read the line as flight, and it was not flight, it was placement. He had put the light where he wanted it. He had put it in our eyes. The 2 we lost off the back of the file, the rearmost client and the one before him. They were crestborn, and they had grown bored of walking behind an old warden's caution, and they had let a gap open, 3 lengths for the small slackness of hunters who have decided the danger is all ahead of them and none behind. I felt the file lengthen, and I turned to close it up, and they were not there. No sound. No struggle. The reeds stood exactly as they had stood. The firm ground ran back the way we had come, empty, and where the 2 of them had been there was only the silver water and the black mud and the reed, and the light coming off the flats, and nothing else at all. I want to say I understood then. I did not. I understood a great deal. I understood that 2 clients were gone off the back of a tight file in open marsh in bright day without a sound, which is a thing that does not happen, which I had never in 41 worlds seen happen. But understanding that a thing has happened is not the same as understanding what it means. And I still, even then, even with the cold all the way up my crest now, and my 4 hands going to my weapons, I still thought of the human as ahead of us. I turned the party, and we swept the back trail, and we found, at the edge of a deep channel, 1 mark. 1. A single place in the black mud where something had come up out of the deep water onto the firm ground and gone back down into it, and the mud was already filling the mark as I read it, the silver water sliding back in, erasing. He had not run into the marsh. He had crossed it days ahead of us and doubled back through the deep water where no sign holds, and he had been in the marsh the whole time we walked into it, behind us and beside us and under the reed line. And he had let 7 of us walk past him on the causeway and taken the 2 at the back because the 2 at the back were the ones who had let the gap open. And he had done it without a sound, while the light he had placed sat in our eyes. I gave the order to pull out of the marsh. It was the right order. It was 600 years of correct instinct, and it was exactly what he wanted. And I knew, even as I gave it, even as it was the only order to give, that I was doing the thing he had built the marsh to make me do. There is a particular horror in that, in feeling your own good judgment become a leash, in understanding that the thing hunting you has read your training and your caste and your 600 years, and has laid the ground so that your best doctrine walks you where it wants you to go. I pulled us out of the marsh to the south, onto the high ground, because that is what you do. You get onto ground you can see. and the high ground to the south was exactly where he wanted 7 frightened crestborn standing at dusk, and I put us there. That night the clients were not eager anymore. The flatness had gone out of their eyes, and the thing they had come to buy had been delivered to them at a price none of them had agreed to. They wanted to leave. I will tell you plainly that they were right to want to leave, and that if we had been able to leave, we would have lived, most of us, and that the reason we could not leave is the reason I am the only one telling this. The lift had gone silent. Our transport sat where we had left it, a day and a half south, on the savannah at the edge of the fern, and it did not answer. Not damaged, I could tell from the nature of the silence that it was not damaged. Damaged transports scream. Ours was quiet the way a thing is quiet when someone who understands it has reached inside and stopped it and left it standing exactly as it was, unmarked, so that from a distance you would think it whole and only wonder, walking toward it across the open gold ground in the bright day, why it did not answer, and wonder and keep walking, because there is nothing else to walk toward. He had been to our transport, before the marsh, before the ford, maybe before we landed. The old sign we had followed for 3 days, the patient northeast trail of a resident specimen going about the slow business of living. He had laid it for us to find, and while we followed it, he had gone the other way, south, to the one thing on the whole preserve that could take us off the world, and he had silenced it and left it standing and come back and let us pick up his trail and follow it northeast, away from the only door into his country. Every true thing I had read had been left for me to read. The thin file, the clean unhurried sign, the turn to the marsh, the favor of the broken ground, all of it true, all of it placed. I understood then. Standing on the high ground in the last of the light with 6 frightened crestborn and a dead transport a day and a half south, I finally understood the thing the file had not told me, the thing the deep registry mark meant and had always meant, and that not one of us had read correctly. That the human was not the quarry of this hunt. That there had never been a hunt, in the sense I used the word. That from the moment the consortium sold the booking, from before we crossed, the shape of the thing had been the other way around, and the 9 of us had bought passage to a preserved world at great expense to be moved and thinned and positioned by a patient old predator who read our doctrine the way I read a muddy bank, and that the word restricted on the file had never meant expensive to kill. It had meant this. It had meant, what happens if you go? The next day he took 2 more, and by then he let me see it, or a part of it, because I think he wanted one of us to see it and carry it. And he had already decided, in whatever cold economy runs behind those flat pale eyes, that it would be me. We moved south at first light toward the dead transport, tight, no gaps now, weapons out, 6 crestborn and myself, everyone reading the fern line, everyone reading the sky. The fern stood tall and moved in the wind, and the wind moved everything, so that the whole world seemed to shift at once, and a thing that does not move when the fern moves is invisible in a world where the fern is always moving. I know that now. I did not have it as a rule then. I only had the crawling certainty that the ground I could see all the way across, the bright open ground where nothing could hide, was full of a thing that did not need to hide, because it had learned to be still inside the movement of a world that never stopped moving. He took the flank man out of the fern at the edge of the savannah, and this time there was a sound, one short sound, and I turned in time to see the reason there was a sound, which was that he wanted there to be a sound, because the sound turned all of us toward the flank, and while we were turned toward the flank, the man on the other flank went down without any sound at all, and the fern closed over the place, and the wind moved it, and it was as if neither of them had ever stood among us. 2 more. 4 of the 9 gone, and I had seen exactly as much of the thing that took them as it chose to let me see, which was nothing, a bending of fern that the wind explained, a shape at the edge of the light that the light explained, a suggestion of a thing that stood upright and unhurried and was gone. The 4 that were left broke then. I could not hold them. You cannot hold crestborn past a certain point. The pride that makes them fearless makes them ungovernable when the fear finally lands, and it had landed all of it, all at once, 600 years of control doozing collapsing into one raw flood. They ran. South, toward the dead transport, across the open gold ground in the bright day, 4 crest-born hunters running from a thing they had paid to hunt. And I ran with them because a warden does not stand alone on a killing ground to make a point. And because some part of me, the oldest part, understood that running was also what he wanted, that a thing that runs on open ground has given up the last of its choices. But there was no choice left to give up, and so we ran. He took them on the run, in the open, in the light, and I have gone over it, and I cannot tell you how, except in the way the marks told it afterward, and the marks told it like this: that he had placed himself ahead of us, not behind, ahead on the line of our flight, in the last place a fleeing thing looks, and that he had let the first 3 run past him and taken the 4th, and then the 3rd as it faltered at the 4th's fall, and then the 2nd, and that the whole of it had occupied the space of a few strides, and that when it was done there was one of us still running, and the one still running was me. And I understood that this was not because I was faster or luckier, but because he had reached out and closed his hand on the others and had not closed it on me, and that the not closing was as deliberate and as cold as the closing. I stopped running. There is no dignity in what I am about to say, and I am going to say it anyway, because the young wardens who want the shape of the story more than the truth need this part most. I stopped running and I turned to face him because a vascure of my crest does not die with his back turned, and I put up my weapons, all 4 hands, everything I carried, and I found him at last, standing where the fern gave onto the open ground in the full bright level daylight, making no attempt at all to be unseen, because he no longer needed to be unseen, because there was only me, and he stood there and let me see the whole of him for the first and only time. He was old. The file had that much right. Old the way a thing is old that has been used hard and kept. He was smaller than I had let myself imagine. Humans are not large. That is one of the jokes of the thing. The great restricted terror of the Red Register is a soft, upright, unarmored animal you could take for prey at a glance, which is exactly the glance the whole galaxy took, which is exactly the glance that had sold the booking. He wore plain clothes worn to the color of the ground. He carried a weapon of his own, a simple thing, human-made, and it was not raised. He was not out of breath. He had run the same ground I had run, and he was not out of breath, and he stood in the light and looked at me with those flat, pale eyes that held no anger at all. That is the thing I most need you to hear. There was no anger in him. There was nothing hot in him anywhere. He had taken 8 crest-born hunters off the face of a world in 3 days, and there was no more heat in his face than there is in a warden checking a snare. And he looked at me the way I have looked at 10,000 animals, with an attention that was complete and entirely without malice, and entirely without mercy, the attention of a thing deciding what to do with what it has caught. I did not raise my weapons the rest of the way. I want to be honest about that too. I had them up and I did not fire, and it was not courage and it was not surrender. It was the oldest instinct of the trade telling me, in a voice I had trusted for 600 years, that the thing in front of me had already decided the outcome, and that my part in it was finished, and that the only choice left to me was the choice between dying now, uselessly, with a shot he would let me take and then close his hand, or living, if he chose it, for a reason of his own. I had spent my whole life reading the intentions of things I hunted. I read his. He did not intend to kill me. He intended for me to go home. He spoke. Humans speak. I knew that from the file, though I had never expected to be spoken to by one, the way you do not expect to be spoken to by a browser or a stepcat. His voice was low and even, and it carried across the open ground without effort. He said 4 words. I have given them to the registry board exactly as he said them, and I give them to you the same way, because I have found that people want to add to them, want to make them a speech, want the great terror of the Red Register to have delivered some verdict on the galaxy. And he did not. He said 4 words and nothing else. And the 4 words were worse than any speech, because they were not addressed to my crest or my caste or my people, or the consortium, or the registry. They were addressed to me, the survivor, the messenger, the one thing on the preserve he had decided to keep. He looked at me and he said, "You booked the wrong world." Then he lowered his eyes from me the way you lower your attention from a thing you have finished deciding about, and he turned, and he walked back into the fern, unhurried in the bright day, and the fern moved in the wind and took him, and I could not have told you, 3 strides on, which movement of the fern was the wind and which was him, and then it was all wind. I stood on the open ground until the suns finally sank, which on that world is a long time, and then I walked south to the dead transport, and it was silent still, and I sat by it through the dark with my weapons in my 4 hands, and I did not sleep. And I did not need to, because he did not come, because he had never intended to come, because I was not quarry, I was cargo. I was the thing you send back so that the message arrives. In the morning the transport woke. He had left it whole, only stopped, and stopping is a thing that can be undone if you know it has only been stopped. And I understood that too, that he had left me the means to leave so that I would leave, so that I would arrive, so that I would sit in front of a registry board and a survivors' council and a room full of young wardens, and say the thing he wanted said, which I am saying now, which is the only true thing I brought back from the preserve world. We did not hunt him, he let us come. The trail we followed for 3 days he laid for us to find. The marsh that favored him he chose because it favored him against us. The light he placed in our eyes. The transport he silenced before we ever picked up his sign, so that the door was shut before we walked through it. Every mark I read on that world, I read correctly, and every mark I read had been set down for a warden of my crest to read, by a thing that had studied what a warden of my crest would do, and had built 3 days of true and perfect sign to walk 9 of us exactly where it wanted us to die. The file said restricted. The file was thin because there was nothing to write. You do not write the behavior of a resident specimen. There is no behavior to record until you go, and then there is only one behavior, and only one witness comes back to record it, and the record is always the same, and it is this record, and I am the witness, and I have filed it, and the file is no longer thin. They ask me, the young ones, whether I was afraid at the end, on the open ground, with my weapons up and the old human looking at me. I tell them the truth, which is that by the end I was past being afraid, and that the fear had come earlier at the ford, kneeling in the mud, reading the 3rd crossing, understanding for one cold instant before I talked myself out of it that a thing had walked its own back trail to see how it looked to whatever was coming up behind. That was the moment. Everything after the ford was only the working out of a thing already decided. The fear is always in the moment you read the sign correctly and refuse to believe what reading it correctly means. I have hunted 41 worlds, and I never had that fear before the preserve, and I have never been without it since. And they ask me the last thing they always ask, the thing under all the other questions, what he was doing, the human, when the transport lifted and I looked back at the preserve for the last time, whether he watched us go. Whether there was anything in it, any sign, any mark, any last thing set down for me to read. There was. I read it correctly. I have stopped talking myself out of what reading it correctly means. He was not watching us go. He was down in the marsh belt at the edge of the silver water, in the ordinary bright morning, and he was doing an ordinary thing, the slow, patient business of a thing that lives on a world that feeds it. He had a line in the water. He was fishing. He did not look up. He had taken 8 crest-born hunters off the face of his world in 3 days and left the 9th alive to carry it home, and it had cost him no more than it costs a warden to reset a snare. And by the next morning he was at the water with a line, unhurried, the whole thing already behind him, already nothing, and the world lay bright and open around him with nowhere in it for anything to hide. And he did not need anywhere to hide, because on that world, and I think on every world his kind have ever set a soft, unarmored foot upon, there had only ever been one predator, and it was not us, and it had never once been us, and the file had tried to tell me so in a single deep mark that I had priced instead of feared. I filed the record. I gave up the second crest. I do not guide anymore. When the young ones come to me wanting the shape of the story, I give them the truth instead, and most of them go away disappointed, because the truth has no hall in it and no trophy and no great verdict spoken over the galaxy. Only an old animal at the edge of the water, fishing in the bright day, on the ground that had always been his, that we paid a fortune to be delivered onto, believing to the last that we had come to do the hunting.